Good afternoon and welcome to HealthSystemCIO.com All-Stars panel, Future-Proofing Your Cloud Strategy by Making the Right Investments Today, a webinar tweet chat combo from HealthSystemCIO.com sponsored by NetApp. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief at HealthSystemCIO.com, and I will be your moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat hosted by Nancy Wilcox, our Director of Sales and Marketing. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag CHCIO chat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the media viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A panel. When you have a question, please type it in and send it in. We'll take those later in the program. And you can download the deck by using the URL on your screen. It's been sent out in the chat box, and it's also at the bottom of our slides. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring David Chou, VP and Chief Information and Digital Officer with Children's Mercy Hospital, Mike Reagin, Corporate VP and CIO at Sentara Health System, and Joseph Hobbs, Senior Manager for the Epic Alliance at NetApp. So without further delay, we are going to jump right in. David, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and role?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Anthony. So a little bit about Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. We are a standalone pediatric hospital. We have two facilities, two hospitals, for about a little bit over 40 the state of Missouri and Kansas. We are a $1.3 billion organization with just a little bit over 8,000 employees. And our mission is to serve every kid and treat every kid regardless of their ability to pay. So on average annually, we provide about a little bit over $125 million in uncompensated care. So that's a big mission for us, and that's what we are all about in terms of providing the best pediatric care for the region.
Excellent, very good. Mike?
Thanks, Anthony. Mike Reagin, Chief Information Officer. A little bit about Sentara. We're a integrated delivery network of hospitals, medical groups, long-term care, kind of post-acute, and a medium-sized health plan here. We have 12 hospitals, about 400,000 people, well, almost 500,000 people covered lives, and about 3,800 providers in our medical staff located in Virginia. We're the largest provider of healthcare services in the state, and we kind of span from Northern Virginia down to the northern part of North Carolina.
Very good. Joey, a little bit about NetApp.
Yeah, thanks for the time. So Joey Hobbs, I'm a former healthcare CIO. I spent about 15 years working in healthcare IT in Indiana. So I work for NetApp, and I'm responsible for our alliance with Epic. So I work primarily with customers and sales teams supporting Epic. NetApp's a Fortune 500 company. We've been around 25 plus years, the number 2 flash provider in the world and significant presence in healthcare. So I'm very lucky to work on a team supporting healthcare customers across the country, and look forward to the webinar.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mike, let's start with you. How would you describe your current cloud strategy, and how has it changed over the past few years?
Yeah, good question. So I'm fairly new to Sentara. I joined here about 2.5 years ago, and I think when I got here, I would say it's safe to say Sentara was about 0% in the cloud. So really an on-premise focus, and really something that, you know, has been kind of a unwritten rule that we weren't going to push a lot of things to cloud. Over the past 2 years, we've really done a ton of analysis, and we've set a 5-year strategy now to get rid of all of our data centers, and so move to 100% cloud vision and a cloud-first strategy. So that's a pretty big transition for us right now, and it's something that we're kind of midstream with, building business cases, doing tests with different cloud providers, and really setting up kind of more of a hybrid cloud to take us through this transitionary place, and eventually get to, you know, as much to 100% as we could being cloud hosted. So pretty significant change, and pretty large scale movement to cloud over the next 5 years.
Very good. Looking forward to learning a little bit more about that. David, talk about your strategy and how it's evolved.
So my strategy throughout the various organizations has always been cloud first. Very similar to Mike and other healthcare organizations, most organizations have been risk averse, and moving towards the cloud has never been a big priority. So even at Children's Mercy Hospital, when I stepped in, thinking cloud first was not a priority. We still had things as simple as backup to tapes. I haven't seen tapes backup in a long time. So one of the first initiatives I have undertaken was at least backing up all of our information to a public cloud provider. So we are thinking cloud first. Our ERP will be moving towards Amazon. Luckily, a lot of our core systems are not in our data center. They're either hosted or in a SaaS model. And similar to Mike, I do want to get out of the data center business. And that's a very scary thought for a lot of the staff who have grown up in the traditional world of racking and stacking, configuration. They still feel as if that is part of their core job function. So thinking cloud first is an organizational and a cultural change. And one thing I would highlight is just because you buy Microsoft, Azure, you buy Amazon, you buy Salesforce, you buy these platforms doesn't mean you have a cloud strategy. There's a lot that needs to go behind the scenes to really have that cloud strategy. But definitely for me personally, the cloud strategy of thinking going cloud first has not changed. But organization-wise, like most big changes, it's a massive shift. So we're in that journey, but I would say we're moving right along with some of the initiatives that has been completed.
Excellent. David, let's stick with you. What do you look for in on-premise solutions as your journey to the cloud evolves?
I'm trying to move away from on-premise solutions, but what we look for is a lot of times you may be challenged with moving into a cloud environment, whether that is the enterprise system that you're purchasing is not cloud ready. And we see a lot of that in healthcare where even if you want to move it to a public cloud provider, you may not be able to do so just because the application may not be ready. So therefore, you're always going to have to settle for a hybrid environment. And that's what we're going to see, where you will have a mixture of hybrid on-premise versus in the public cloud. My personal preference is to get as much into the public cloud from a strategy perspective. But when I think about these on-premise solutions, I would say you really have to build out to scale, making sure you can support at least 1.5 times of your employee workforce, making sure your workload is there, making sure you have enough power and cooling in your physical data center if you still have to have one. But I do see the biggest challenge is some of these enterprise healthcare applications are just not cloud ready. You think about some of the apps that are built on traditional programming languages. Some of the world's largest EMRs are built on COBOL and MUMPs. So there's no way you can move those to the cloud as much as people want to work on it or to a public cloud provider. So those are some of the challenges that I do foresee as people are thinking about that cloud first journey. So therefore, it will always result to a hybrid model. And hopefully you get to the point to where you have a small of a footprint on-premise. So that's how I look at it in terms of my journey to a cloud first.
So David, do you check in with these large application providers, legacy application providers, and find out what their strategy is? Do we assume everyone has a strategy to move their application to the cloud so that you just have to wait until it's ready, or are there some that just are not going to do that?
For the most part, they are. At least they talk about it, right? That's the first step. They're talking about it. They're thinking about the strategy. They do say this is part of our roadmap in the next X number of years. But the reality is, how do you rewrite these applications? As much as you want to say it's part of my strategy, rewriting it is a business disruption, and it's also a gamble. For some of the companies, you're talking about rewriting your entire application suites, and you're generating a huge profit right now. So do you really want to rewrite this and make a change, or do you just let it ride it out? So it's if I was running these enterprise applications that's written in legacy code and I'm making a ton of money, that's a very hard decision. So, but the good part is everyone talks about it. Everyone knows that organizations and our peers are thinking cloud first, but how soon when they get there, that's still to be determined.
Mike, we talked about you're trying to move from 0 to 100, but as David mentioned, the reality may be for at least a little while of a hybrid. So what are you looking for in on-premise solutions?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I agree with David. So in kind of our journey, we had a couple dimensions that we kind of looked at of kind of how we make this journey to cloud. There was a dimension around risk and really about, you know, probably the crown jewels and the things that are most sensitive are going to be one of the last things to move to the cloud. And then there was this assessment of cloud readiness, or really are the applications written in a way that they can be, you know, easily ported to the new system. And then third, we had kind of an expense reduction, you know, exercise and a dimension around cost and really about solutions. And so kind of drilling into each one of those, you know, when we look at any technology solution now, we kind of compare it to these dimensions, like what is the risk? And when we looked at that, it was around, you know, where, you know, when we look at our footprint out there, you know, outside our corporate data center now, there's probably 300 different locations where, you know, we have data interfacing to that's outside, you know, our four walls. And how we're going to manage that from a security perspective and from a third-party risk perspective. So we had to kind of build tools and to be able to manage that and to make sure that our data is secure. So that was one big hurdle. The second, when we did the assessment, about 50% of our applications were cloud ready. So we could see kind of in the next year and a half, you know, a pretty significant amount of those kind of being able to be, you know, relatively easy to port to a cloud platform. The other 50%, we kind of have them in two different buckets. You know, ones that are architecturally need to be redesigned to be cloud ready, and then there's other ones that are more contractual and platforming concerns that we're going to need to negotiate that capability with the vendor. That's kind of a key piece to how far your journey is going to take and how many years it's going to take to get there. And then third, you know, we really looked at this idea of moving from consumption or from capacity to consumption. So today, when you build systems on-prem, you usually are forecasting capacity, how much memory, how many procs, how much storage you need, and you know, traditionally that's something that people overspec. The requirements for the vendor are usually high. The requirements from engineering local are pretty high. So you usually spend a little bit more than you actually are ever going to consume. And even with the technology of virtualization, it's really hard to take advantage of all the extra capacity. And so flipping to this consumption-based model, we really look at that as a way to reduce operating expense and really kind of, you know, try to get to a point where what's the minimum number of resources I need to actually run this platform, this solution, and how do I, you know, manage that in a different way, in a different kind of mindset than I have in the past about worried about the basics around availability and reliability. Those are kind of foregone conclusions, but how do I now kind of optimize the spend and the performance of that application through kind of this new model?
Very good. Joey, your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've learned as I've come to NetApp, and I think it's a little different, is, you know, I agree with Mike and David. Healthcare's kind of lagged in starting this journey, and certainly Mike and David are leaders in what healthcare is doing. The thing I would say from a vendor perspective is a lot of our competitors in the space and NetApp themselves have been figuring out what's our cloud strategy. You know, predominantly, you know, we've sold a lot of physical hardware storage over the past 25 years to reside in data centers. And, you know, I think the leadership of NetApp has leaned in on what the public cloud providers mean. So NetApp has decided we will not be creating our own cloud. So the infrastructure that customers invest in today, so for instance, if you invest in NetApp's flash storage in your data center, we build everything in our software to also work with public cloud providers. So what I mean by that is you can, starting at thinking early 2018 still, you'll be able to run NFS file services in Microsoft Azure. You can go today to Amazon's marketplace and you can purchase NetApp's ONTAP software, which is the exact same software you run in your data center, and you can start to do things in the cloud the same way with the same tools that you do in your data center. So what we've done and taken a different approach is, you know, Mike and David talk about these applications and are they cloud ready? Well, we're doing that same work that our software is ready for the cloud and to make that as seamless for our customers as possible. I think it's very factual that we will see this hybrid environment for a number of years. You know, even two leaders like Mike and David wanting to go 100% cloud, that's a lengthy journey. So NetApp's taken the approach of how can we make that easier? How can we create that hybrid environment? And then we've also created some workshops where we help advise our customers. So we have some cloud workshops and service design workshops because some organizations first want to operate like a service provider themselves. So knowing what applications and what tiers of data are most susceptible to being able to go to the cloud because it's, you know, packs data that's not accessed very often or whatever that might be. We provide a lot of, you know, free consultative services to our customers of the best ways to bring the public cloud into their existing workflows.
Very good, very good. All right. Mike, let's go to you on this one. Do you or your team consider cloud-enabled when investing in on-premise solutions?
Yeah, we do quite a bit. In fact, we're starting to write into contracts both the cloud security language we need for the future as well as, you know, a cloud readiness. If the solution's only, you know, on-prem and it's not available to the cloud, then we really take a hard look at, is that really the future, where we need to be. In most cases, we're finding that most vendors have a path, you know, to cloud if they're not already cloud ready, and so it's not been a big concern. But, you know, really getting the right language in the contracts and the agreements that you do with people is a key part of this, because obviously when it's not in your four walls and your ability to manage it and how you need to be able to manage things in the future, it's a different paradigm, and so having some of that spelled out in the contract is an important piece of evaluating these solutions.
Very good, David.
Oh, definitely. The way I look at it is when I look at any new solution is probably cloud first. Hopefully we don't have too many new ones that are still having to be an on-premise solution. So I don't see those as much anymore, especially with the newer applications that we're either renewing licenses or doing some sort of upgrade. Everyone has some sort of cloud-enabled feature. So it's very rare, unless you're talking about these one-off applications that may be in research, or just that one-off application that's tied into a lab system that's on someone's workstation. So it's very rare to see that anymore, but definitely I do require those languages. We can even talk about some of the contract requirements, such as the security features, and even some of the prerequisites as far as when can they start billing for a cloud contract. So a lot of prerequisites in there from a contractual standpoint, but definitely I do think about making sure those cloud-enabled features are the priority for me.
Excellent, excellent. All right, Joey, let's go with you on this one. How important is the concept of technological flexibility in determining a data management vendor?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I think if you just listen to a few of the comments, the things that we keep going back to, cloud first, operational efficiency, cost differences, consumption models. You know, when I look at the data management space that exists today, a lot of the vendors in the space can't do everything across a single operating system. And not just even in an on-prem solution, because many have to offer different products on-premise. But if you look at, okay, now how do I want to use the cloud? So one example that we have, we've had a lot of conversation with customers is this stale data, you know, the file services and the images that don't get accessed forever. If I could automatically tier those out to the cheapest part of storage, you know, that with just by using policy-based and things like that, that's something NetApp's able to do with our ONTAP by taking advantage of becoming a software company. So we really made a pivot probably 3 years ago to move away from the hardware business to becoming a software provider. And sure, we still sell a lot of storage, but the difference between us and a lot of the competition is that single management. And we look at it as, you know, I talk to a lot of customers about data mobility. It's really about putting the data where you want it, when you want it. Some customers might be like Mike and David, where, you know, they have this immediate plan. If I can put it in the cloud, I want it there, but I really want to be that 90 to 100% within 5 years. And some customers may want to get there over 7 to 10 years. What I see as a differentiator for NetApp is whatever you buy today to run on-prem, there's no additional licenses needed to then start to use things in the cloud. We build everything to enable the cloud, which is a really strong differentiator.
Excellent, very good. David, your thoughts on this idea of technological flexibility?
Yeah, I think that's critical. I'm glad to hear Joey say that they are moving to be more of a software company, because the reality is selling hardware is a commodity, and it's pretty much a race to zero, meaning who's going to be able to sell the cheapest. So it is critical to think about this data management and how you're going to manage data movement. The future of managing cloud in a mature state is really thinking about how do you operate these environments at scale, not just with one cloud vendor, but with multiple cloud vendors. So when you think about what the workforce is going to be focusing on in the future when you're in that mature cloud state, you're really managing multiple cloud deployments. So your on-premise, your hybrid model, your multiple public cloud vendors, you're monitoring consumption. It all comes down to that data that's driving the details. And then what's most important, your team members really start to become a broker, I'll call it, of these various clouds, because you're going to have to figure out how to manage cloud-to-cloud integration, which a lot of folks are not even thinking about right now. People think if I just buy application A, or if I buy a commitment with a public cloud provider, I am cloud ready. Well, you may be for 1 year, but what are you going to do about cloud-to-cloud integration? So it's really important to think about that aspect. Philosophically, that's where we're headed to. So now how are you going to manage this data and this access across the various players? So it's really critical to think from that standpoint, this cloud brokering and data management.
David, can you give us just a little more on this idea of cloud-to-cloud integration?
Yeah, so let's think about the fact that when we get to mature state, your EMR may be in a public cloud provider, your ERP may be in a different host. So I'll just throw out 2 random names. One may be Microsoft Azure, another one Amazon Web Services. Now, the typical integration currently on-premise is you have some data exchange through interface engines. So what are you going to do when we get that mature state? You're going to have to integrate between Amazon and Microsoft. And you got to make sure they're connected. You got to make sure data flows in through those 2. And what about the backups? Would you want to back up your EMR data from Microsoft to Amazon and vice versa, just to be able to get that redundancy? These are all things that need to come in mind when you're starting to think about cloud-to-cloud integration. And that's why when I talk about the future of the workforce, people who are managing cloud, they really become this broker. They're working through these cloud providers to broker transaction and broker the data movements.
Very good. Mike, your thoughts on the idea of technological flexibility, or feel free to comment on anything David or Joey has said.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I agree with both the colleagues on the phone here. That this idea that you're going to need to be able to be agile, and you're going to need to be able to move workloads between clouds, and you're going to need to be able to be responsive to both things that you have on-prem in the cloud during this hybrid state in the future is an important piece. And I would just say that, I would just add that, getting the cloud right is a lot about getting your network right. And so, a lot of the prerequisites and kind of getting, to the cloud is really having a great networking strategy. And, being able to build that kind of footprint and, cloud cross connects and what you need to be able to do is an important piece. And so I would agree with everything everyone said on there. I do think that, your data management and kind of where your kind of center of gravity is, where you store data, is an important concept. And so, I usually think about, a couple different factors as we're kind of, looking for where workloads belong. The relationship to your analytics strategy and any data warehousing strategy, and the relationship to any service management strategy that you have if you're going to be getting more into custom developed apps or any kind of mobile first piece. And so those are important considerations as you're kind of looking for technological flexibility, where you manage your data, how you do that, because data becomes your greatest asset in this new world here.
Mike,
hey, Anthony, real quick.
Sure. Go ahead, Joey. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one of the things that that David talked about, because I think that's really important in foreseeing what's coming. So recently, NetApp actually purchased a company, a software company, very small. You probably wouldn't notice in the news, but the whole basis they're built on is around cloud orchestration. So I almost see where when we become these cloud-driven organizations, what's to stop you from starting to move data from cloud to cloud based on price? And it becomes almost a commodity of training. So, you know, we really at NetApp look into what that orchestration looks like and are investing in that already. So I just wanted to touch on that since David brought that up.
Very good. Appreciate that, Joey. Mike, can you give me a few more thoughts on getting your network right? You just focused on the importance of that.
You know, I think that if you kind of think about, you know, your current operation and kind of your data center, how it's laid out, your data center kind of fabric, if you cut and paste that exactly as it is into the cloud, you're going to go bankrupt. It's absolutely not the right kind of model to do that. So there is a fair amount of redesign that needs to go into this. And so you need to think about kind of the on-ramp, off-ramp, where data is going to be moving to and how you're going to do that. You know, we're investing kind of, you know, in a cloud cross-connect vendor and actually having kind of intermediary systems and near cloud storage and these kinds of things as ways to improve our costs and kind of reduce latency, especially in some of the kind of more mission critical applications. And so that's an important concept because you're kind of like you're giving up a lot of the control, especially in the public cloud vendors, you know, kind of where and when and how your data is kind of being positioned. And so you need to think through that and understand kind of how data kind of flows through your organization, what's acceptable latency, you know, what are the acceptable security parameters to wrap around that and how that's going to move through your organization. And so, you know, that's very important in kind of designing the overall big picture on cloud. You know, I would say that, you know, this idea of load balancing and kind of always on, there are ways to kind of, you know, utilize the public cloud strategy and other private players to do that for you, but you really got to become an expert in it. You really actually have to understand, you know, how you're going to kind of redesign kind of the data center fabric so it's based upon, you know, something that's efficient and kind of scalable, but at the same time, probably quite a different model than what you have in your data center because the pricing drives a lot of that kind of discussion. So I don't know.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Excellent. Joey, let's go to you on this question. Educate the audience a bit about how flash storage and how it should inform your cloud strategy.
Yeah, so I think I've probably touched on this a couple different times, but one of the things that we really look at is I'm a big believer in you're going to end up more in that hybrid market. And so for me and for NetApp and how we talk to our customers is really around making the cloud part of your strategy. So when you invest in flash performance, it's really twofold. You want this high performance, you get a lot of savings from heating and cooling and density and these things, but you don't want data that's not being used to sit on that storage. So being able to take advantage of the cloud natively with tools that are built into the array that you're purchasing is extreme cost savings. It doesn't require complexibility of needing to purchase another product or you know, additional licenses or things like that. But it also frees up that investment to be used for the performance that you actually need. And so when you look at a lot of analytics or a lot of these things that are going to come in the future, the reality in healthcare is we use a lot of this data for a little while and then we don't touch it again. But we have to store it because of policies and, you know, all these things that are there. So, you know, we want to condense the footprint in our data centers, but we also have an enormous amount of data already that's just growing exponentially. So for me, it's really important for customers to understand that what that cost long-term is versus just that initial purchase price, because not all are equal when you look at your total strategy.
Very good. Joey, let me stick with you if you want to add anything here. What is a hybrid cloud arrangement, and discuss its attributes beyond anything we've covered?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hybrid cloud, what we'll see, and I think probably even a little bit in David and Michael's vision of what the future is, I think we'll still have a level of presentation layer at each organization. You know, Mike talked about the network and the importance of that. Radiology is really hard to push to the cloud because of the size of the images. You know, you have virtual desktops and you have these Citrix instances. Often I think we'll find that those type of environments will still stay on-prem. So personally, I think that's kind of idealistic where you want to get to. A lot of the presentation stuff sits on-prem, and hybrid cloud can mean a number of things. It can mean public cloud providers, co-location where someone else is managing your environment in a data center that you don't own is another form of a hybrid cloud. And so I see those as all viable options depending on, you know, your cost preferences, your local resources, and really what your strategy is. When we get into this cloud environment, true public cloud is a complete operating expense. And a lot of healthcare organizations are still very adverse to operating expense budgets rising and want to purchase things capital investment dollars. And I think there's still going to take some time of how we shift through just the economics of what healthcare has been driven through from an on-prem. And I think that's part of what we talk about with the hybrid cloud is the financial modeling as well.
David, your thoughts?
No, I would agree with Joey had mentioned in terms of what I think about just the environment of my hybrid cloud. Definitely no data center on-premise, meaning I do not want to manage that environment. Doesn't mean that it can't be using colo. So my preferred scenario would be to have either colo. For example, I'm fortunate enough in Kansas City to have a partner like Cerner who has a great data center. So rather than me try to build something to that standard, I'd rather put my on-premise stuff in a colo or at a Cerner site and have that brokering transaction with a public cloud provider. So that would be my ideal hybrid cloud environment, just because I can't manage that to the scale and efficiencies that someone else of a company whose bread and butter is to create these data centers.
Michael, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with the colleagues and Joey. I think he brings up a good point about, you know, infrastructure that's going to remain on-prem for at least the foreseeable future. You know, there's going to be there's a whole new kind of management, you know, thought process to go through when you kind of be in a hybrid cloud. And so, yeah, I think that's certainly going to be our environment for the time being, for a long while. It's hard to forecast more, you know, a year or two into the future, you know, obviously, because you kind of tend to overestimate when it's really long-term and underestimate, you know, things in the medium term. So I'm hopeful that, you know, the cost structure gets to a point where, you know, a cloud first and a whole cloud becomes the way of the future. But we're going to need to be in that management paradigm of hybrid cloud for a number of years right now.
Very good. All right. Let's go with you on this one, Joey. What is the most important thing that CIOs don't know about selecting a data management partner?
You know, I look at probably a couple different things. The number one being is things have just shifted so quickly. And we've moved from these environments where, you know, I talk to a lot of executives across the country, and, you know, they're used to buying infrastructure every 3 or 5 years. But they also never want to buy infrastructure again every 3 or 5 years. And so one of the things that I really talk through them with is what that means from vendor to vendor, and what things you're able to do with NetApp versus some of our competitors. And there's pretty significant differences both from a cost perspective and a flexibility perspective. You know, I've talked a number of times about the innovations that we're providing in our base system of software that allows the use of the cloud or different technologies. I think if you look at a lot of companies like ours, you need a different product. A lot of them either believe that they want you to run like a cloud provider in your own data center, or they're building their own cloud. NetApp made the decision a long time ago that we were going to partner with the largest cloud providers because that's who our customers are going to want to use, and we want to enable that. So if you look at whether it's IBM or Apple or Google or Amazon, those are the customers that are these large cloud providers that organizations are going to move to, and we're working to have relationships and enable that. So I think that's really the thing that a lot of folks have to look at is you don't want to buy for 3 years or 5 years anymore. You really need to understand what the additional costs are to enable this cloud journey. And to Mike's point, we have short-term plans and we have long-term plans. I think often we kick the bucket down the road and then realize what the price tag is. And I think we're at a place in today's world where enough people, maybe not in healthcare, but other industries, are taking advantage of the cloud that I know I personally can really help look at what those costs are from one option to another.
Excellent. All right, Mike, let's go with you here. Talk about contracting with a cloud vendor. What are some best practices and caveats?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that today there's so much variation when you're negotiating these deals based upon timing, length of commitment, time of year, all these type of things that it's actually really a pretty complex negotiation process. And so the way that we've kind of settled on this is trying to make these cloud decisions in more massive kind of buys rather than kind of incremental buys. So we've kind of tried to lay down footprints where we've kind of said, well, we're going to make a commitment, of X amount of our infrastructure, 30% of our infrastructure to go into cloud, and we're going to look at that as a whole rather than a piecemeal negotiation, and that's been much more effective. The pricing and the way to get advantage in the cloud, I think, really comes into play as you get to scale in the cloud. It doesn't mean that you have to select a single cloud vendor. I think that there's certainly most organizations I know have multi-cloud strategies, but being able to get some center of gravity and some alignment around a scale, and especially in your negotiations, is important. Otherwise, the contracting can be a little difficult to kind of get the level of discount. I would just add that the kind of thought process that you go through there. Security is another key component there. There's a lot of good information out there on the Cloud Alliance and other websites there that we've kind of put in, but we've put in nearly almost a page of language around how we want to manage security, what kind of data we want back from our cloud vendors, what kind of notification we want in case there's any issues, what kind of transparency we want in the cloud arena. With the public cloud vendors, this has not been a significant issue. What we find is, though, that some of the more software as a service kind of cloud offerings coming from single software vendors, they struggle a little bit more with a lot of these security requirements and some of these kind of data management requirements. So I think having a good stance on that and getting that language kind of developed before you go into the negotiation is an important piece of it. I would say the other piece would be scale. Especially in this kind of realm right now where cost reduction is kind of a foregone conclusion in healthcare, we're really trying to leverage, a cloud as a way to reduce our operating expense.
Very good, very good. I want to manage the time we have left here, so I want to get to a few more questions. And David, let's hear from you on this one. Talk about the security aspects of going to the cloud. Are some CISOs holding their CIOs back from going down this road, and what are their main concerns?
I hope they don't have main concerns, because I could guarantee you every public cloud provider security is better than what we could build on-premise. So hopefully, but you still hear that. You still hear a lot of traditional CISOs that would say, oh, well, no, it's not as secure. Trust me, you cannot build to that scale. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest myths. But definitely, if I were to piggyback off your contract questions, what should you have in your contract regarding security? Because what happens with these typical cloud agreements, they are going to be one-sided. They're always to the advantage of the vendor. So you have to understand that going in, and you need to really be informed and talk to even your internal legal team that this is a one-sided agreement. But when it comes to security, most of the time the vendors would have some really generic language such as we will implement reasonable and appropriate measures, but doesn't tell exactly to what standards. So really from a security aspect in these agreements, put in the standards. Put in you want ISO, whatever those numbers are, SSAE, and so forth. Really specify what do you want work towards from a compliance aspect. And I guarantee most of them are okay because they have to face the same regulatory requirements. But definitely when I hear those comments from a CISO that says there's a security concern when moving toward a cloud vendor, I really discount that.
Joey, do you want to touch on contracting security or both?
No, I think certainly both are important, and I was actually going to use part of this for one of my Ask the Co-panelist questions. So, all right, Anthony, I will.
Let's jump to that.
Go ahead and.
Let's jump to that. Go ahead. Look, ask a co-panelist.
The question I would ask David and Mike is you guys have obviously investigated and done a lot of work around the public cloud providers, and healthcare being further behind. Is there one public cloud provider over the other that you found easier to work with? I agree with David in that the security teams that they have in place are probably a lot better than all, if not close to all, people are running from their own organizations. But if you found one easier to work with, whether that's contracting around a business associate agreement or, really where have you seen the investment from those large organizations in trying to lean in and partner with organizations like yourself in building solutions? I think that would be interesting for people on the line to hear.
David, you want to go first?
Man, Joey, you're going to get me killed with these partnerships that we have. No, but to answer your question, is there one that's better than the other? I would say, well, for us, we've started with Microsoft a lot earlier than some of their competitors, so we have built a better relationship with them. They were willing to be one of the first ones to sign the BAA with us from a healthcare standpoint, but I think we're mature enough at this stage. I'm doing something with Amazon for our ERP, so very comparable. But the most important thing I look for in these cloud agreements, there's a whole list of priorities, but the top three that I really look for is security, which I touched base on, really specifying the standards. Second is data access. All right, you need to figure out during a time of transition because you're almost locked in. So when you need to make that transition to another cloud provider or bring back someplace else, are they willing to help you move the data and transition the data easily to another provider? That's another thing I really look for. And the third one, how easy is it to terminate an agreement? Because no matter what, when you think about moving towards a cloud model or a SaaS model, this vendor lock-in, you are locked in. So how easy is it to terminate and move to a different provider if the relationship goes south? So for me, those are the three things I look for, and most of the cloud providers are pretty open in terms of having those discussions, and they're reasonable. So I don't know if there's one over that's better than the other nowadays. I'm assuming you're dealing with the major players. Obviously, you're dealing with some of the smaller tier players. They may have a little more flexibility, but then the product may not be as good as the top tiers.
Mike, you want to take a crack at Joey's question?
Yeah, maybe just a quick comment on security in this. As an industry, we've seen a lot of high-profile, large-scale downtimes with the all scripts, the nuance, the NHS, having hospitals out for this. So I think security is a concern, as you're going into these kind of arrangements, and it's not all just Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. It's a lot of other people who have presence in the cloud. What I would say is that we found that the offerings are really expansive across all the the large-scale public cloud vendors, and we found that different workloads fit in different places easier. So when we talked about custom software development and mobile app development, we've kind of found different public cloud providers who really specialize in that, and and really provide us, our needs in a greater way when we're doing a large-scale API management and so forth. When we've looked at, research activities and those type of things, there's definitely advantages to other cloud providers. So, we've looked, the advantages, the tools available like on Google for research, software development with Amazon, infrastructure management with Microsoft. They all have different pros and cons across them. And so, not that you couldn't put any workload in any cloud, but I think there's just some advantages that you get. So, I think, kind of understanding what kind of workload you're going to put out there, what kind of solution you're going to put out there, and trying to match it to the people who offer those compelling platforms is important. So, we have a multi-cloud strategy. We're not trying to lock into any one public cloud vendor, but, we try to make the best decision based upon the quality of the technology and the offerings they have with price. And so that's been there. We haven't seen much of it as far as negotiation or BAs. It's getting pretty standard now in healthcare for people to sign those things. So we're starting to see a lot more of congruence around all the different public cloud vendors. But I will say there are a few that do some very, very high-end security work that's really nice if you want like a private, cloud kind of piece inside a public cloud. There are some people who are doing some interesting work in that space. But in general, we're finding it, pretty much parity across the different vendors. But technologically, there's a fair amount of difference.
Very good, Mike. Did you have a question for one of your co-panelists?
Yeah, I was interested to see if anyone's been able to get any cost reduction from their use of cloud, and kind of what should CIOs, globally kind of look at as they're kind of making this transition. Is this an opportunity? Does this increase costs? Does this decrease costs? What's been your experience as far as net impact to your CIO budget?
Well, David, why don't we put that to you?
Yeah, so I would say one of the, I won't call it a big cloud myth, but the theory that you're going to save money, that's probably not true. You may not save dollars. So for us, we saved a little bit, but it wasn't as much as we believed we were going to save with the original TCO. But here's where you do save. Your resources are not focusing on managing infrastructure. So there's a cost, a soft ROI cost that needs to be calculated. So for us, we did not see a big decrease in cost. You probably save on average 15%. Which for you, Mike, may be a big number, but also because of your scale, you may be a little bit higher than you're operating maybe right now versus on-premise. So there's a balancing factor, and then there's a cutoff point to where it actually costs a little bit more to go to the cloud. But what you may gain is that efficiency from your staff, the agility to spin up a environment in a matter of seconds versus weeks or months if you don't have to go through procurement. So those are these soft ROIs that you really have to think about how to calculate. And the challenge that I had was there's no right formula to calculate this. If someone tells you they have this magical formula to calculate ROI, I have not seen it, so I would love to see it. But I have never seen that yet. So it's really muddy when you try to calculate ROI. And there is a big debate, and sometimes it may be costing higher. And also the second thing I've noticed is depending on the organization structure, whether you want to be more heavily driven on a capital investment perspective or operating, because that's going to hit your balance sheets. If you move toward a cloud, that's going to hit your operating expense a lot more. So that may rub off the organization the wrong way as well. So those are the things I would say you have to balance. But in terms of cost savings, significant cost savings for us, it was about 10 to 12%, which was a little bit lower than what we had initially projected. But I have not found a way to really calculate that soft ROI.
Yeah, and I think the word that I would use to tag onto that is the flexibility you gain. And that's, the agility and things he talked about from efficiency. Overall, I don't see a huge cost savings. To David's point, I think you see some mixture of shifting to operating versus capital. And I think ultimately that drives decisions of co-locations versus public cloud, because that also provides flexibility of what you can do from a financial perspective. But I agree that from a TCO model, and every amount of staff's different, if you can free up some of your people running tape backups today to work on increasing something else or developing new skills, you know, what's that value to your organization? And that might be value that ends up parlaying down the chain to someone that is now working in analytics and developed an algorithm to reduce your sepsis rates. So those are really hard, like soft things to come up with a TCO, but as you start to change your organization's vision and how those people are used, you know, there's some real power to that flexibility.
Very good. David, did you have a question for a co-panelist?
So the question that I had, you know, I just had this discussion with a lot of our peer CIO is we're being tasked to drive innovation. But at the same time, we're not driving innovation because a big effort on every organization right now is going through what I'll call it, to keep it nice, operational efficiency, which is the nice way of saying cost cutting. So how are you balancing that? You know, we talk about trying to drive cloud adoption, we're trying all these innovative things, but at the same time, they're trying to cut costs. So it's a very tough thing to do to try to balance that. I would say that's a challenge that I have personally. Would love to hear how Mike is dealing with it.
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, you know, I find that, you know, cloud is a catalyst for this, but, you know, kind of serious robotic process automation to get everything automated is certainly part and parcel to getting, you know, efficient cloud management in place. And I think that you know, whether you did it on-prem or whether you did it in the cloud, certainly there's some cost, you know, there's some ways to reduce kind of your operational day-to-day kind of work. And so, you know, I find that, you know, we're trying to redirect people from operations to those innovative spaces. And so, you know, it's about trying to free up. I think Joey made that same exact comment, is about if, you know, the skill sets of the future for, you know, managing systems is a little different than they are today. And so as you kind of build that new capability in your team, you're able to kind of redirect labor or reduce costs, you know, in a lot of cases. And that's really been our mantra, has been trying to figure out a way to be more innovative by making operations more efficient in the day-to-day type of things and redirecting those people to higher value tasks. I still think that you know, that's only part of the equation, but I think that's really where cloud can help you on the innovation curve.
Joey, I'll give you the last word. Anything you want to add to that?
The innovation piece, I think, David, and what I see with other customers is the better organizations are about showing cost savings and innovation from things they're doing on the clinical front, help show the value to the organization. So, you know, what I mean by that is your informatics teams or your analytics teams, you know, if you're driving down clinical costs and how you relate that back to the organization, it's easier to have a conversation with the CFO of where that is helping drive. And I'll give a quick example from my old organization was we had a group of our hospitals had gone to Epic, and we had one on Cerner and one on Meditech. Well, the deployment of Epic had significantly reduced the amount of transcription services needed because physicians were doing a lot of that work on the front end. So from an IT area, we were able to show, I want to say it was around $1 million a year, that was reduced from another department's budget because that was hitting transcription or medical records, but that was a direct correlation of savings from Epic. And so I think as IT leaders, the closer you are to the efficiencies gained in other areas, helps you, you know, sell the value of IT in organizations and places that may or may not understand that correlation.
All right. Thank you, Joey, and thank you, everyone there. What a great conversation. When you close out your WebEx window, you're going to be taken to a post-event survey. If you can answer that, we'd appreciate it. Regarding continuing education, for those of you who hold the Chime CHCIO certification, attending our webinars gets you 1 CEU, so let Chime know you were here. And if you've asked us to do so, we certainly will. If you need a certificate of attendance for another CEU program, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll receive an email when our archive recording of this event has been posted to our YouTube channel. If you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team. And you can go to our website to see our robust upcoming schedule of webinars. So with that, I want to thank our panel, David Chou, Mike Reagin, Joey Hobbs, and I want to thank our sponsor, NetApp, for making the event possible, and I want to thank you, our attendees, as always. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.